We're so glad today to have had the Gideons make their presentation, and I wanted to, I might as well put it on here. You ought to read Joel 3, verses 1 and 2 regarding the two-state solution, where God says that he's going to bring the nations into judgment because they have divided up my land. And that's kind of our official position at this point in this country. So we've made it all the way in our study of Genesis to chapter 23, and I'm Pastor Dave Kooyers of Country Bible Church in downtown Boonville, California, and I will try to get this posted on YouTube. And so we're going to take a little look at last time I did this, I did 22, 23, and 24 all in one sitting, but we did 22 last week, and we're going to do chapter 23 today. Chapter 22, especially we looked at the Akedah. Abraham was tested there. We looked into the double blessing on the third day. We visited Mount Moriah. We looked into parables in the Bible and the substitutionary death of the ram caught by its horns that God provided. But the big point is the Akedah, the binding it's called. This is the Hebrew, what the Hebrews refer. If you're witnessing to a Jew and they bring up the Akedah, you'll know it's chapter 22 of Genesis with the offering of Isaac. And remember, God told him to offer Isaac, not kill Isaac. And we made a distinction in that. And Akedah really means the binding. So chapter 23, if you would, please open your Bibles to chapter 23 of Genesis, and if you're able and you're agile enough to stand and read your Bible, we will do so. And I'm going to put the verses up on it, so I will have it in both languages, and I will read it to you. Genesis 23, verse 1. Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The sons of Heth answered Abraham and said to him, Hear us, O my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. So Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and approach Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field, for the full price. Let him give it to me in the presence for a burial site. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, saying, even of all who went in at the gate of the city, saying, verse 11, No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed before the people of the land. He spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If you will only please listen to me, I will give you the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Then Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth. 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. Verse 17, So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and the cave which is in it, and all the trees which were in the land that were within all of the confines of its border, were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that was in it were deeded over to Abraham for the burial site by the sons of Heth. Thank you, folks. Please be seated. So this is a big deal. Do Abraham and the descendants of Abraham have a right to that land now? They bought and they paid for it. I'm going to show you they paid about 10 times the amount that it was worth. Virtually all of the land of Israel that they came back and repossessed, about starting with 1900s, all of that land they went in and bought it from the locals. They're accused of being possessors of the land, not owners of the land. They bought it, and like Father Abraham, in the same kind of settings, they went and paid through the nose to buy a bunch of desert and a bunch of swampland. The land of Israel at that time, you can read the account from about 1850 from the famous American author who went there and recorded it all. He said it was a wasteland. There was nothing but sagebrush and cactus and thorns, and he had spoke of it in the worst possible ways. When the French went in there, they got malaria from the mosquitoes. It was all of the valley areas were all mosquito-infested swamplands. When the Jews got possession of it, they dug like the vineyards do around here. They dug and they put drain tiles down in there, collected them into wells and water sources, and they dried up that swampland and made it a flowing river again. And that is what turned it into the fertile ag land that they did. And since then, they've converted the deserts into citrus groves. They provide most of the citrus for Europe. They did that in the desert and in the swamps. And they paid, like Father Abraham, way over market price for most of the land in Israel. That's extra. Are you counting my time again? We're going to run over today. I can tell you that already. So Sarah died. Genesis 23:1. Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So again, we would consider this to be a long life. It wasn't particularly long at that time. I want to say Abraham lived to 175 or something. But remember when we looked at the 900-year lifespans in the first 10 chapters of the book of Genesis, and then they went down to about 250, and then they went down to under 200, and now at this point she's dying at only 127. Why do I take time to bring that up? Because I just got hit with another apologetics issue. In the news, there's a Christian that just lost his position as a professor because he mentioned the 900-year ages in the book of Genesis, and they fired him for it. Wow. Even though it's history. It's a historical account. So anyway, they're on the way down. We just had the lady that was the longest lived in Willits, a month or two ago, 115 years old, and she just died. So, yeah. There you go. So, it's a big deal here. This is a big deal in chapter 23 in the book of Genesis. Sarah was much beloved. She was very beautiful. Remember, she was taken captive by 2 different kings on 2 different times. So there's a lot of artwork about Sarah's burial. It's a big deal. It's a big deal I'm going to show you in the rest of the Bible. Who are the sons of Heth, though? The sons of Heth, descendants of Ham. Remember, we have Ham, Shem, and Japheth were the 3 sons that got off Noah's boat and repopulated the planet. And descendant through Ham down to Canaan. You remember the curse that was on Canaan because of the homosexual act that he did? The name also refers to a Haitian people of Asia Minor, some of whom may have penetrated southern Palestine for commercial reasons. By the time the Hittites became a great empire in the 14th century BC, the Indo-Europeans had established themselves as the ruling class and ruling dynasty among them. So the Hittites get a lot of, I didn't do the number count on them, but they come up a lot in the Bible. Can you guys see the screen okay? Yeah. So Abraham's grieving, and that's a natural process. We are allowed to grieve. Verse 2, Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. I can tell you this would be a deep grieving weeping. He was deeply, deeply hurt by her loss, I'm sure. Why is that important? Well, the shortest verse in the New Testament, John 11:35, says Jesus wept at the death of John, his friend John. 1 Thess 4:13, we do not want you to be uninformed or ignorant, brethren, about those who are asleep or dead, so that you will not grieve as the rest who have no hope. Christians should be grieving differently than those who are without hope. For Christians, it's a graduation ceremony. You know, if you've got an unsaved loved one, we're going to grieve more deeply for them. But if you get bad news that I've died, don't believe it. I'm more alive than I ever was before. We'll be in a glorified body in heaven with the Lord, and rejoicing and embracing my relatives, who knows back how many generations, and fellow estudiantes that I had here in the country. So we don't grieve like the world does, but grieving is natural. And this biblical record of a woman's death is unheard of almost in the Bible. So to make a whole chapter about this death of Sarah, it's a big deal. Sarah is one of only two women who make the Hall of Faith. The other would be Rahab, and I don't like to call her the harlot. She was an innkeeper, and a lot of the innkeepers weren't harlots. So we don't have no information that Rahab was a harlot, but that's another sermon. Hebrews 11:11, by faith even Sarah herself received ability to conceive even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So why was Sarah saved? We don't get it anywhere else. She was saved because she considered God faithful. You remember what happened at the announcement of Isaac being born a year later? She laughed out loud, and then she lied about it. God said, Jesus says, Abraham, brother Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? And she goes, I didn't. Are you kidding me? But she considered him faithful who had promised the baby. 1 Peter 3:5, for in this way in former times the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. Her children, or a daughter of Sarah, would be the other way it comes up in the Bible. We talked about this before, or when Jesus said, you are of your father the devil. When it equates somebody like this, it's talking about your being like them. So you are daughters in Sarah in that you believed him who is faithful. So in that way, you're like Sarah. Doesn't mean you're of Middle Eastern descent or the same bloodline or anything else. It's talking about the main characteristic, which is she believed God and was credited as righteousness, like her husband. So lots and lots of artwork about Sarah's tomb. But this brings up burying the dead. 23:4. I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. That's what your position is on the planet, right? You're an ambassador for Christ. Your citizenship's in heaven, and you're a stranger in this country. Give me a burial site among you that I may bury my dead out of my sight. I thought that was interesting. He repeats that twice, out of my sight. Genesis 23 uses burial and buried 4 times and bury 6 times. I couldn't find any other NAU chapter that even came close to this. This is the burial chapter. There's nothing else like it. If you want to know about buried or cremated, we're going to look at it right now. Look at all the chapter 23 references there are to bury and buried. This is just burial and buried. And Genesis has the most uses altogether, 19 of them. And we've got all these in chapter 23. The word bury comes up in here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 6 times it mentions the word bury. So it is the burial chapter. And 14 times, next one is only 5. So 3 times more than any other book of the Bible that mentions bury. Verse 4 is the first NAU use of the word bury. It is the focus of the chapter. It has more uses of, this is with the wild card on the end, any word that has B-U-R-I in it, burial and buried are the main ones, than any other chapter I could find. It greatly honors Sarah. It clearly is the bury and buried chapter. There's nothing else like this in the Bible. In chapter 23. And some of these I call them oddball chapters in Genesis. It's easy to overstep them. Thank you for having me take the time to dig in a little deeper, because I didn't notice this in the last 3 or 4 times I've taught Genesis. So this is new ground for me also. So the question I get all the time is, what about cremation or burial? It costs more to bury somebody now than it does to cremate them. I found 165 references to burying in the Bible. Paul teaches about planting the body in the ground like a seed. Many see burial as a testimony for unbelievers, much like baptism. Believers are buried in the Bible and unbelievers are burned up. Please pray about your decision. And it's a decision each one of you has to make. You have to process what we're going to look at now. And then let your loved ones know what your preferences are, whether you want to be burned up or whether you want to be buried. The reason I bring up the baptism is this is a chance where we are dunked in the water, we're immersed in the water, similar to the way we're immersed in Christ when we're born from above, and then it says we're raised to newness of life the way Christ was. And Christ was buried in a tomb and raised again. And Paul goes, when you plant a seed, you don't expect to get that same body out. You expect to get a harvest, maybe 100 times the harvest when you plant a corn seed in the ground. So that's kind of what's going on here. And I see yes, it does cost more of your funds that you would have left to your grandkids or whatever. But there's also a testimony that you're giving to everybody that attends your funeral and everybody that walks by that gravestone for the next time till the Lord returns, that you were planted as a seed and your hope is in the resurrection. So that's kind of where we're going there. The Jews are very, very serious about it, getting back every body part that they can. They make a big deal. They also make a big deal about being buried with their feet towards the east. They know Messiah is going to come from the east, the morning dew of the dawn. Psalm 110, verse 2 or 3. So they know that Messiah is going to come from the east, and if their feet are pointing there, as soon as they're raised up, they get to see Messiah first. That's their idea with it. So the Philistines violently decapitated and desecrated Jonathan and Saul, King Saul, remember him? They desecrated their bodies and hung them up on a wall for about a week. So they were in I'm convinced the bodies were in rough shape, being set out in the desert sun on the public wall for a week. It couldn't have been a very pretty sight. So they burned them. 1 Samuel 31:9. They cut off his head, stripped off his weapons, and sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their enemies of Israel, to their idols and to their people. Verse 12. All of the valiant men, took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. They took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So King Saul was incinerated. I think that may have been because of the condition that he was in. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. So.
Quick comment here. Years ago in Minnesota, we went to a Laotian family Buddhist funeral service, and I was surprised to see they had a coffin there because they always cremate. And a young lady told me, says, if they died a sudden death, like in a motorcycle accident, they often just bury the body.
Huh. They don't have, get it out of sight, probably.
A lot of burying the body is about disease. They died of a disease and sanitation.
Yeah.
Public health.
That's the same reason we bury. Yeah. That's yeah. And Abraham just said twice, to get it out of my sight. He didn't want to see how the body would be desecrated by vultures or whatever. 2 Samuel 21:12, then David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead. Verse 14, they buried the bones of Saul and Jonathan his son. So obviously there must have been something left. They burned them, but they didn't do a 3,000 degree incineration like cremation does. They burned them in an open fire probably because of the stench and the bad shape he was in. They burned him, but the bones were left. So they gathered up the bones and buried them. 1 Kings 13:31, after they had buried him, they spoke to his son, saying, somebody else, when I die, bury me in the grave in which the son of the man of God is buried, and lay my bones beside his bones. So this is about the prophets again, a prophet that was buried. But again, they wanted to be buried, not incinerated like the pagans did. 2 Kings 23:16, now when Josiah turned, he saw the graves that were there on the mountain, and he sent and took the bones from the graves and burned them on the altar and defiled it, according to the word of the Lord Jehovah, which the man of God had proclaimed, were proclaimed these things. So this burning of the bones there was a defiling act, and it was against their enemies of the Lord. Jeremiah 8:1, at that time declares the Lord, they will bring out the bones of the kings of Judah and the bones of its princes and the bones of the priests and the bones of the prophets and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem from their graves. So this is good prophets that will have their bones revisited. They weren't incinerated completely. Let me back up just a minute. The normal procedure that we've talked about ossuary boxes before, they would have a tomb like Jesus was buried in, carved into the rock usually, and they would put the body in there, and about a year later they would go back after the flesh had all been disappeared. Then they would gather up the bones and put them in an ossuary box, about 2 feet long, a foot by foot or something, soft stone box with carvings on a lot of them. And they're all over Israel. You can go and see them. I've got to see them. They've got them on display. But that would gather up, and that's what they did with Joseph, and some of those other prophets would be the same thing. They're saying, go get their ossuary boxes, bring it, and do something with them. God warned Jerusalem in Ezekiel 24:9 that he's going to be judged. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, woe to the bloody city. I will make the pile great. Heap up the wood, kindle the fire, boil the flesh well, mix up the spices, and let the bones be burned. So God brings up this idea as a judgment of his on Jerusalem of burning their bones, in other words, rather than being honored by putting in a beautiful, long-lasting stone box. The references I found for burn or burning are not good, any of them. I couldn't find any good ones. 1 Kings 13:2, he cried against the altar by the word of the Lord Jehovah, and this would be to the altar, and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a man shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by the name, and out of you he shall sacrifice the priests on the high places who burn incense on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. So this is a prophecy by God as a judgment that they would be burning bones on the altar, human bones, and that totally defiles it. Deuteronomy 12, verse 31. You shall not behave thus towards Jehovah, Yahveh, Lord your God. For every abominable act which Jehovah hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. I'm convinced this is more about human sacrifices than it is about cremation versus burial. But it was nonetheless about burning up humans. Same thing with Revelation 17:16. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, and these will hate the harlot, and they will make her desolate and naked. They will eat her flesh, cannibalism, and burn her up with fire. This is also probably more about death and punishment than it is more about cremation. So what do we get out of this? I want you to consider about Abraham being a good example for you. Verse 6, he says, they said, none of us will refuse you free land to bury take any grave you want, they told him. But he didn't. He wouldn't accept a gift, an inappropriate gift like that, even though it's very valuable. We're going to find out it's a tremendous amount of money that he ends up shelling out. Verse 7, so Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land. He is not arrogant or proud here. He's humble before the people. I love in your paperwork, Dale, and the Gideon's paperwork, they call unbelievers pre-Christians. I've got to start working I got to memorize that phrase. I love that phrase. For anybody that's not a Christian yet, what are they? They're not an unbeliever, they're not a pagan, they're not our enemy. They are a mission field, and we should consider them as pre-Christians. They just haven't received the Lord yet. Genesis 23:18 and 9 also talk about in your presence that he spoke. So this is no backroom, smoky room deal. He's publicly, when he says he went to the gate of the city, that's like saying he went to the county courthouse to make this business transaction. It's a public purchase. Ryrie Study Bible says, remember Abraham did not even receive anything, or I said that. Ryrie says on 14:22, Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord your God, most high, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or a sandal thong or anything that is yours, for fear that I would say I have made Abraham rich. So that's not from Dr. Ryrie, that's from me in the Bible. So that's an error, Ellen, if you would, please. But this was Father Abraham's modus operandi. This is what he'd done before. He didn't receive a gift from that he deserved, actually. He was a prince in the land. You know, if some foreign king came to America and he happened to die here, and the president said, we want you to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, we offer you a gift of burial space in our land as an honor, since you're a prince, that would be accepted probably, or it may not be. But nonetheless, Father Abraham didn't take that gift. Verse 13, then he says, I will give the price of the field. So he's honest in his negotiations. He doesn't want a special price because he's a prince in the land. Verse 16, he pays 400 shekels of silver, of the commercial standard. So there's no shaving of the coins or dishonest scales or anything else. He's doing it with the currency of the land. Verse 17, the field and the cave and all the trees. Very, very specific here about this piece of land. Even counts the trees that are included in it. Then he says, verse 9, give me the cave at the end of the field. He bought what they were willing to sell without bullying or arguing about it. I'm going to show you why he did that. But here he says, no, I'll sell you the field with the cave at the end of it. He asked to buy the cave. Cave's not a real valuable thing. You know, a field with trees on it is a valuable possession. So he wanted to buy just a burial site with an easement to trespass to it probably, but but no, he had to buy the whole field, including the cave. So why do I bring up all this detail that we're given in chapter 23? You only find that in the Bible. You do not find that in Watchtower publications. You don't find that in the Book of Mormon. You don't find that in any of the Eastern religions or anything else. Nothing like the Bible has. Dates, times, places, distances, people names, place names, all these things are specific details. The age of the king, the year of his ascension, all those things are minute details in an ancient record that you can go back and check yourself. Only the Bible has these type of specific dates and details. Some archaeologists use biblical details to seek and find ancient locations based on this kind of specific information. When it says they did a 3 days journey or whatever, they measure that out and go out there and start looking for a mound or a low place that might be that place, and they find it. Or the palms or the wadi or whatever. Bones. Chapter 23 brings up bones again. Comes in here, and now bone of my bones. No, that's not it. How come I missed it? Oh, it's our first use here somewhere. Anyway, there's 108 hits that I found on bone or bones. That's a lot. Why do I bring that up? Well, Ezekiel 37, you remember we were there just 6 months ago or so? That's the dry bone scenario about Israel being brought back into the land. Now they're there. Now they're there in exactly as God prophesied in Ezekiel 37. So that's why we get more references to bones in Ezekiel than anything else. So. First mention we did was in chapter 50. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, will carry my bones up from here. And Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mentions of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. So he wanted to be buried in it. He had to be buried in Egypt, because they were still captives there. But the same thing again, they buried him for a year, collected the bones, put them in an ossuary box, and that bones get carried all the way back and buried in the promised land. So, I feel like Dr. Mel Couch now. I hope this is not in bad taste or irreverent, but I found this and I had to share it. Apparently there's a third option between burial and cremation. Is that irreverent, Ellen? They also now allow cryogenics, that would be freezing, and also in California, just this last year, California legalized composting human remains. It's been in Washington for quite some time, and the information I pulled up is more about Washington. So we've got choices: bury, cremate, compost, or freeze. I found this, and I don't know who to credit it for. Let me encourage you, and it could be me, to be at peace about the subject, since the Lord is far more concerned about what you do while you're alive in your body than after you leave your earthly tent to meet him face to face. And that may be from the last time I taught this. I can't remember, but that's our focus. What do you do with your body now that he's given you, with the precious minutes and seconds and hours that he's given you here on planet Earth while you're alive? He's not so worried about what you're going to do with your earthly tent when you shed it. GraceThroughFaith.com is one of my favorite sources. I highly encourage you to use their stuff. They say, quote, in the past it was thought that by cremating one's body, there would be nothing left for God to raise at the resurrection, as if such a thing would exceed God's abilities. But even a casual understanding of the embalming and burial process reveals that it creates just as much a big problem as cremation. Then there's the fact that within a short period of time after burial, a dead body decomposes to dust. Speaking of our Bible, the body says, by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Genesis 3:19. So in summary, there isn't any biblical basis for this view. Therefore, there can be no condemnation for having a dead body cremated, close quote. So, to be clear, God will not enliven decayed body parts to resurrect the believer. The vast majority of believers' dead bodies are no longer intact, but scattered throughout the world as dusted atoms. The answer to the question about organ donations and resurrection is this: God does not need the remains of the body to resurrect the body. God will reform the believer's body, we should have a hyphen in there probably, huh? He will reform the believer's body and the unbeliever's body from existing materials, just like he made Adam's body, and that's from author unknown, and it could be me from last time. So, because this comes up all the time. Well, hi, buddy. Organ donations, I've gotten that before. Is it okay to cut out my liver and heart and eyes and whatever else once I'm dead for organ donations? God doesn't care about that dead body. Don't kill your body, but once it's dead, it's in the Lord's hands, right? So, and don't be like the JWs who had people dying because they refused to get a transfusion or people going blind. There was some major countries where the JWs were, where they had eye disease that was causing people to literally go blind. And they could have fixed it with a simple cataract surgery, but they said, well, that's like drinking blood. Cataract surgery is not like drinking blood. Organ donation is not like drinking blood. The references about drinking blood are about a religious ritual to a pagan deity. That you don't want to do. But whether you get a cornea transplant or a heart transplant or whatever, trust me, it's all in the Lord's will. He's in control. Besides the fact that we're all going to be made new. You're going to get an upgrade, physical upgrade. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I have been known fully. That's an intriguing verse, worthy of your study. What does that mean? We know that we will be like him from a few other passages. What does that totally entail? You're not going to be God. Doesn't mean that. But you will be like him. I was going to say something else here while we were at this. But it went away because I'm a senior citizen. Oh, so we found a bronze mirror discovered from 2,300 years old one. So that's just about our time frame. It's one of the reasons I stuck it in this slot. Besides the fact that I just quoted you the verse that we see in like a mirror dim darkly. Mirrors in Bible times were not glass with silver coating on the back like your mirror. They were highly polished brass or silver. So polished to such a degree that you could see a reflection in it. So that's why it says see dimly. So there's a picture of it. And the other side would be the mirror portion of it probably, and it would have been polished to a mirror reflective finish. Trust me, we're not going to read the whole article, but I wanted to tarry a minute here for our YouTube audience. They can search patternsofevidence.com for the bronze mirror, and I'm sure you'll find it. I cut a clip out of it. They say, besides the unique mirror found with the woman, other facts hinted at her origins, such as her body having been cremated, which was well known in the Greek world. This is the earliest evidence in Israel of cremation in the Hellenistic period. Steibel explained, cremation is alien to this country, Israel, and the religion, Judaism. It is not only forbidden in Judaism, but would have been practiced by the Persian Empire either, which occupied the region up until the times of the Greeks, ellipsis. Another significant clue was 4 iron nails placed in the tomb. The Greeks used nails to protect the deceased and to safeguard the living people from the dead. Deceased bodies were literally nailed down to assure that they would not come back to the world of the living, according to Steibel. I thought that's kind of interesting, isn't it? talk about over the top. You know, in our culture, 100 and 200 years ago, they would say the bell rings. What's that saying about the bell rings? He who rings the bell. That literally was something. They would bury you in the ground, put a string down there that went up to a bell. The idea being if you come back to life within a few days, you could ring the bell. And they would have people sit in the graveyard after a burial for 4 or 5 days to make sure nobody rang the bell. For who the bell tolls, I think is the phrase I'm looking for. But so anyway, that's...
Well, people used to get buried alive, right?
Yeah, there were people, and there still are. Well, since we do more cremation, it's not so much. But so I've heard this question raised as sometimes like, what about the Christian missionary who gets eaten by a cannibal, then the cannibal gets eaten by a lion, who finally dies and is eaten by buzzards? Okay, so you know, how's he going to be resurrected? Hebrews 11:19, writer of Hebrews says, he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he had also received him back as a type. Trust me, in Bible times they understood that that body was not the real you. The real you is software, not hardware. We got a computer technician with us. He understands software and hardware. You, the real you, your person, your soul, your intellect, we are three-part persons. Humans are three-part, I say. We are body, soul, and spirit. Okay, we all have a body that's corruptible and it's going to go away. Your soul, even your dogs and cats, I believe, have a soul. That's the seat of our emotion, intellect, and will. What your dogs and cats don't have is a spirit that can relate to God. You'll never come home and find your dog kneeling down before his bowl of kibble, giving thanks to Almighty God for this food. They don't have the ability to relate to God. So, body, soul, and spirit, we are three-part persons. That's the nature of human beings. When you have your graduation and you go before the Lord, you will be reunited at the rapture with a glorified body, because humans have body, soul, and spirit. Abraham only wanted the cave. He says, give me the cave. Okay? And then we now know why he was forced to buy the whole field. This is from Ryrie. That he may give me, better sell me. Abraham wanted to buy only the cave of Machpelah, but Ephron wished also to sell him the field in which it was located. Hittite law required Ephron to be responsible for dues on the entire property if he sold Abraham only the cave, but not if he sold him the entire parcel. So the duty, the property taxes, if you will, go to whoever owns the whole property, not if you just sell a piece of it. Dr. Fruchtenbaum says the reason was that Hittite law included feudal responsibilities for landowners, in that service was to be rendered to kings by landowners fell only if one purchased a complete lot, but not on someone who purchased only part of the lot. Therefore, if Abraham purchased only the cave, then Ephron would still have feudal responsibilities to the king regarding it. Hittite law code required the owner of a complete unit of the land to perform the king's ilku, or feudal services, and that's the reason Ephron did not want to sell him only the cave. So he had to buy the whole field. So these are the things that we're finding in archaeology now that show the detail of what the Bible is. And a lot of the strange practices in the Old Testament we now can justify because that was their normal law that they were under. I say in the Bay Area we used to have, try to sell a house to somebody. Well, they wanted to tear it down, build a new house. They would hit them with these monstrous fees. Our valley has even gotten a lot worse. So they would buy the home with the existing house. They'd get a permit to do an addition on it, which would take up half of the lot. Then a year or two later, they'd get another permit to remove the other half and rebuild it new. So in a similar process, they could end up avoiding all of the extra fees that were heaped on it. 400 shekels of silver. At this time, a shekel was about weight of perhaps a half an ounce or 15 grams. The field sold for a high price in those days. And some say that was about 10 times what it was worth. More evidence here from Dr. Fruchtenbaum. We're going to pass on that one. Not only Sarah, but Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, and Jacob were all buried there in this same piece of ground. That's the references. The site of the cave has been identified with 2 caves, one above the other, beneath the greater mosque of the center in modern Hebron. So you can go there and see it if you want to. I would warn you, if you do go there, don't drink from Jacob's well. They'll warn you when you get there, because people get, your body is not ready for their water sources. So in closing, you are free to choose, but you are not free from the consequences of your choices. Your brother-in-law, your cousin, your nephew, your grandson are also not free from their consequences. As you know, it breaks our hearts sometimes when they reject the free gospel. Then I got a couple of warnings today that were overtime. Pastor's wife agreed to give him a subtle signal whenever he started to chase rabbits or go down rabbit trails. And I love this one. If I would venture to guess it's probably got a squeaker in it too. That they got a squeaker in there would be my first guess too, with the sound waves going out, but she just rigged it. So I wanted to share this with you again. Israel in comparison to their enemies that are all around them. Israel is the red and the Arab countries are green. That is tiny little Israel there. That's why Iraq and Iran, where's Iran? They're way over here. Fired missiles 1,000 miles to get to them. Took them 3 or 4 hours for their drones to get there. So, and they're surrounded by 1 billion people that hate them. And none of this green area, there's nowhere in there where they could have their 2-state solution. How about in Egypt? They putting up walls. They're walling them off so those Palestinians can't come into them. They know they're terrorists and they don't want them in their country. Why doesn't Jordan take them in? Jordan's got all this land here. How about Saudi Arabia? They're Muslims. What about Iraq or Syria or even up in Lebanon, Turkey? Somebody could take those few Palestinians that hate Israel so much. They leave them there for military purposes. They want an enemy camp in the midst of Israel. That's why they're there. And that's what the problem is. And there will be no peace in the Middle East until the Prince of Peace comes and destroys his enemies. So don't forget Psalm 122, verse 6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Then I pose a question to you. Why in America do we have a general in charge of the post office and a secretary in charge of defense? G. Campbell Morgan says, what we do in the crisis always depends on whether we see the difficulties in the light of God or God in the shadow of the difficulties. Every time you're burdened with an overwhelming problem and you're crying out your heart to God, I want you to remember this quote. Are you seeing the difficulty in the shadow of the difficulties, or are you seeing it in the light of the Lord? It's worthwhile to look at your perspective on what God has allowed into your life. Everything that comes into your life, blessing or curse, is Father filtered. You are his children, and he allowed it into your life. He could have diverted it, whatever it is. But he allowed it into your lives. Give him honor and glory, and figure out how this can praise him. So in closing, being cremated is my last hope for a smoking hot body. I like that one. So the end. Thank you for your attention, folks, and I'm going to close out of here, and we will then close with the word of prayer.
What was that verse about protecting Israel or something? I wanted to forget.
The which one?
That last one.
Something 22.
I can't remember. Oh, well, sorry.
That's not it. No, we're not that far from it, so let me pull it back up. Joel 3:2.
Joel 3:2.
Is that what you're asking about?
Let's wasn't sure, it was that last one you showed about protecting Israel, I think.
So we are way back up here somewhere. That's next Sundays. We don't want to go there yet. Oh, that's the wrong program, so I lost it.
That's okay. It'll come up.
Yeah, there it is today. Let me go back to this one. So we want to go back to this, there, and we want to go up a couple slides. You didn't want the smoking body one, huh?
Keep going up. Uh-huh.
You didn't want the Psalm.
Psalm 1? Is that what it was? Psalm 1?
Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem?
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Psalm 122, okay. Thank you.
Questions, comments, anything?
It's great. Our church doesn't really have much Sunday school going on now. So our Bible study is mostly a men's group or women's group but yeah, you're rare.
Oh, thanks, buddy. I hope that's in a good sense.
It's in a good sense because, I haven't even seen, I go to a lot of churches because I give presentations and I always like to go to the Bible study. And the only one that comes close to you is a guy in Gualama, young pastor in Gualama Baptist Church.
Huh. So we've got a Bible teacher in Wallala?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, send me his contact information. I'll connect up with him because
That'd be nice, yeah.
anybody that teaches the Word of God, we need to lock arms with, So.